My name is Kosova Renata, and I'm Associate Professor of Economics at the Department of Economics and Public Policy at the Business School. And I was also one of the co-organizers of the workshops about robotics and the labor markets. I was really amazed about how much the workshop revealed, that how much ambiguity, uncertainty, and also different views are there about what's the role and what's the impact of the robotization technologies on not only on the labor market and productivity, but also on overall business operations and society. And that ambiguity and uncertainty also sort of reveal that we don't know much yet, but it's the highest time and the most proper time now that we start basically opening the black boxes and talking about things that we know and that we don't know, because deep down everybody understands that as part of industrial revolution phase 4, the robotization will be more prevalent in our professional and business lives. Just the fact that whether it is businesses or we academics, yet we don't know how to go about it. I was really pleased, excited, and also surprised exactly that how much work there is to be done in terms of research and the discussions if we want to go forward, not only from the robotics perspective, but also from the economics and social and policy perspective, because if we want to introduce this technology, we need to do it right. And now is also right time, because with all the COVID situation, social distancing, many companies are actually looking into using the robots that actually could replace humans in many aspects, right? And at the same time, they wouldn't have the same issues with the social distancing like humans have. So now is the right time to actually talk about these things, because many companies are anyway thinking about redesigning their business models and investing a lot of money either into the labor training, into buying new technologies. So if we could actually open all these discussions that this workshop brought in and help all the stakeholders to understand how we should go about these technologies and how we could improve our professional and personal lives with it, that would be really wonderful.
Can you please describe 2 to 3 main technological developments and trends in your field that are currently impacting human labor, both in the short term and the long term?
The work in my lab is mainly on robot manipulation, which is all about how robots can use their arms and hands to interact with objects in the world. There are actually 2 main applications of my work. So one is in domestic robots, and then the other is manufacturing robots. I think in the manufacturing side, that's where there could be some impact in cases where traditionally you would have a large number of people performing tasks with their hands in a factory, for example. But it may also be the case that it simply makes existing automated manufacturing cheaper.
The main developments in soft robotics, for example, not just soft robotics, is compliant robotics like cobots, robots that can work with humans side by side, is really revolutionizing the whole workplace. Already there are assembly plants that use cobots, and then they change the work patterns and the work cells, how they are organized, and then how the humans are empowered to work.
My area of expertise is medical robotics in 2 main fields, surgical robotics and rehabilitation robotics. Generally, surgical robotics, for instance, or rehabilitation robotics are targeted to labor market that is high specialized, like doctors. Mm-hmm. But the long-term goal in this field is to somehow try to replace surgeons or try to replicate while, for instance, physiotherapists can provide in terms of care to a person. And this is to the benefit of the patients in general.
One of the biggest things we do in my group has to do with surgical robots. So I'm going to talk about surgical robots, and I'm going to talk about similar technology, so robotics and haptics, but for surgical training. I would say that both of these technologies are there to augment what is currently possible, although they do this in a slightly different way. So surgical systems tend to help clinicians to perform more complicated procedures, or procedures that couldn't be done otherwise, or procedures that can be done, but they can only, but this way they can be done through a smaller incision.
Thinking of the technological wave we are currently in, how would you sketch the main impacts that technology is going to have on low and high-skilled workers in the foreseeable future?
What we are facing today is a second wave of automation. And in this case, a lot of things that are being talked about is artificial intelligence, which is a different sort of automation technology. Job of white collar workers, like it's being impacted, but rather than pushing aside, let's say, the jobs of the people doing these jobs, what has happened is that people has already more time in their hands. So rather than substituting labor, it might have been enhancing labor and being complemented by these automation technologies.
Bottom line, I think it's very, very hard to say what the effects are. The most interesting question for me is to figure out what kind of workers really are more likely to be resilient. And the reason why that question is very, very important is that once you know that, you can then go back and go the extra step and say, how do we make workers ready for this economy? And given simple characteristics like a lot of formal education and not so much are going to be probably too little to work with.
The new technological wave in general will potentially render lifelong learning and skills transformation necessary for both the low skill and the high skill workers. And this is something that will be further reinforced by an increasing life expectancy that we're seeing. And that second element, we know will increase the span of our working life and will further, present the need for this lifelong learning.
Technology is basically going to affect the way workers do jobs, and that doesn't really depend on whether you're low skill or high skill, defined in the traditional way, which is mostly how the literature has been evolving as well. Right? So I think it will be sooner, for example, that certain certain machines or software can replace a lot of the simple kind of computer programming or data analysis that we need people to do right now before these technologies can replace cleaning or washing or simple things that are typically low skill.
For the low skill jobs, technology in the past, it has also replaced certain jobs while also creating other jobs. Like if you think of delivery services or also in the care sector. And then for high skill jobs, obviously computational skills are becoming increasingly important. And I do not believe that technology will replace jobs as a whole, because this has never happened in the past. And this idea has been around for a long time.
So I see no reason to expect that the current wave of technological advances will be any different to, say, the computer, in that obviously for some group of workers it's highly complementary, and for other groups of workers it's highly substitutable. And if anything, it looks like those trends are accelerating. So if I had to make a prediction, I would say that the types of technologies that are coming through are going to accelerate the kind of trends that we've seen in the past.
Technology is usually classified as either labor reinstating or labor replacing. So how would you classify the previous mentioned trends and why?
So I think in most of what we do, it's certainly labor reinstating, to the extent that they won't necessarily increase the number and demand for human beings to do these jobs, but they will complement human operators doing the jobs better, faster, or more efficiently. They certainly would not, under most circumstances, reduce the number of human beings that will be necessary to perform the procedure.
Probably in the long term will be something about labor replacing, but this is because the demands of having high specialized people is so high and is increasingly high because the aging of the population is constantly increasing. Yeah. There therefore will be try to replace those labor. At the moment, probably is the technology is aided to the labor to improving their skills and facilitate their job.
It appears to be labor replacing, but it is not really the case. It is more of demand and supply. So in some areas, there is not enough labor, and then this creates the demand for robotics. So then the robots come in and they replace those or fill those gaps where labor is in shortage. And then in other domains, AI and robots, they keep empowering humans. There is supply of humans, but sometimes they need higher pay. Now, to get the full potential out of these human workers, it is economical, and then it makes sense to replace their mundane things using robots.
If the tasks are simple enough for the robot to be taught to perform these tasks fairly easily, then actually there wouldn't be very much need for any extra jobs in the market. You would simply be able to demonstrate that task somehow, maybe through physically moving the robot arm to perform that task. That could just be done by anybody. In order to get those robots up and running, it may be that there are new jobs created where people are specialists in interacting with robots and teaching robots.
Do you think cobots will have a relevant role in shaping the future of the labor market? Are they going to swell the ranks of gig economy, or are they more likely to become one extra device inside the traditional firm structure?
So I think cobot is a slightly ill-defined term. I think, like maybe a technologist says the word cobot, they kind of know what they mean. I think from an economist perspective, I don't see that it's very different to previous waves. And clearly some cobots are more like complementary to high-skill workers. So the computer is a cobot, which is highly complementary to my skill and highly replaceable to, say like certain types of occupations.
So I believe it depends strongly on what product or what industry you're looking at, but absolutely, it will absolutely shape what works are effective to do by a human and what are not. And I believe that the long-term effect will be that in production, humans will become increasingly unimportant, and in service and care, humans will become increasingly important.
I do think as long as we maintain like the current form of capitalism, it's just going to be another device within the firms. Maybe the firm structures will change, but I don't think it's going to take away the power from the firm. I mean, if anything, it probably gives more power for the firm, especially if I'm a firm making the cobots. So I think in all of our labor, like I'm also more labor, like I also take more of a labor perspective in most of my research, but if you want to kind of predict the future, I think it's more important to think about like where the technology is coming from and who is controlling them.
It seems to me that there will be productivity enhancing for many workers. Also, they would probably make some jobs more accessible to some workers. So not only less physical effort to do some jobs, but there may be people who are no longer able to perform some jobs that are suddenly able to. So I know that although manual jobs are generally in decline, you still have, for example, over a career, if one has an injury or maybe one gets a bit too old for a job, they need to then switch away for the job if it's physically demanding. That wouldn't be true for cobots.
We have organizations, we have firms, and these firms, like they locate in one single place everything that we need. So then again, if we look for information technologies, we go to Google. If we look for coffee, we go to Starbucks, and this is the role of the firm, like reduce coordination cost and transaction cost. And I think that in the end, like these new technologies will be accommodated into the firm because it's just a more efficient way of being accommodated.
Which are the main human roles that you can think about that we will be needing? For example, like more data scientists, robotics technicians, etc. So what are the human roles that are going to be needed in the short term in order to work or like implement these technologies?
A lot of human workers in maintenance of these robots, and there's a need for designers, so human-centered design engineering and maintenance, and then software engineers who can program these robots, and then sensors and actuator manufacturers. So there are lots of kind of peripheral needs created by the whole robotics industry.
I mean, the goal of my research is to avoid having to have any humans, in a sense. So I would say my research is successful if I can. Well, my research would be successful if people can, non-experts can teach a robot to perform tasks without those people really having to have any training or skills in teaching robots. So, and that will probably be the case one day in the long-term future.
So the clinicians of tomorrow will need to know a lot more maths and physics than the clinicians of today, and that's a fact. A bit like what happened in radiology. Radiology, tens of years ago, was predominantly a clinical science. Now there's enormous amount of physics to deal with MR, CT, contrast, PET, and so on. Surgical specialties will also go through a similar evolution because, of course, these are complicated instruments that require a better grasp of triangulation, coordinate system, imaging, stereo versus mono, and so on and so forth.
The high specialized people know how to design robotics and how to also merge different fields that are not engineering with no engineering field, like medicine, for instance. There are some already initiative in this area where there are some university that are looking to provide a master degree where they fuse a medical degree with an engineering degree, exactly to facilitate the development of those technologies.
To the extent that technology may cause a reduction in labor demand and consequent wage and employment losses, government policies might be necessary to mitigate such a phenomenon. One proposed scenario is a tax on robot owners, through which a subsidy for affected workers could be financed. Do you think this is a viable option? If not, what alternative policy would you propose to compensate for possible income or employment losses?
All right, so as a general rule, we know effectively also that the literature has something to say regarding that. So we know that tax systems in a number of countries, including the US or US mainly if you want, they often penalize labor in favor of capital. And this is a trend that has become more important in the recent years. And it seems, or research seems to indicate that this is something that favors automation beyond what one might think is socially optimal.
There will be jobs where humans will still have an advantage over robots, and those jobs are going to have more people involved, more people employed. However, these jobs may be low paid, and since kept to the extent that robots do substitute, like other technologies, they do tend to move income from labor to capital. We've already seen this, right? So we already see firms that are very, very large and yet don't have many employees. I don't have anything against a tax on robots per se, although at the same time, I find that it makes it sound like it's something new, but it's just the old discussion of capital versus labor.
I think an alternative policy is kind of just to reduce these innovation rents, right? So then you might think that, well, it's the same, like you're just going to depress new innovation. But as long as these rents are positive, I would imagine that people who want to innovate still will innovate, while still, like reducing the rents that go to the technology owners. Because in the end, I don't think it's the owners of people who buy the technology, like robot owners, that we want to necessarily tax. I don't think you want to prevent people from using new technology. I think we just have to make sure that the innovation rents get redistributed.
What is true of these days is that, like usually, like this means of production is not usually owned by the people, the person that where the tax levy would be placed on, but rather, it's owned by corporations, it's owned by a bunch of investments, it's owned by, corporate funds, like it's not owned by one person. And I think that in this case, like if we tax this specific part of the chain of production, it will create inefficiencies.
For me, this sounds a little bit like slowing the process down with a tax. And I do not really believe in it too much. Central element is whether enough new jobs are created or not. And I believe for this, a crucial aspect that is often overlooked is when you spend money on a product, whether you spend it on a finite resource or whether you spend it on technology that can be expanded indefinitely.
I think that slowing down the adoption of technology is ultimately a losing game. Partly that's because international competition will mean that that policy could be undermined. If Germany starts taxing robots and China continues to adopt robots at the pace at which it's adopting them, that's clearly not going to end up well for German workers. In my own research, what I find is that the way to sometimes reduce the harm to workers is to make sure that technology is adopted widely in the economy, meaning that there's not the case that there's some firms that operate at really advanced technology, some other firms that operate at very primitive technology.
Are there any bad technologies, such as larger carbon footprint, higher cost, or more dangerous technologies like harmful tech? Is there any examples in your field?
All the medical robotics in general is a very high cost. And if we are looking where this technology can make an improvement, are specifically toward Western countries or to countries where they have a highly growth. For instance, for surgical, probably China would be the top country worldwide where it can benefit of such a new technology. But developing countries, they don't have access of this technology.
I don't think in the remit of healthcare, any technology will likely have a bad use. However, I am acutely aware of machine learning and deep networks potentially having a counterintuitively negative effect on the broad clinical field. With machine learning, our ability to abstract information and make predictions has improved tenfold compared to what we could do in the past. Now, the risk there is that, of course, these algorithms are not intelligent. They are only addressing and identifying complex, nonlinear patterns within even more complicated data. And so this type of learning algorithm without supervision can very quickly stray into making conjectures that seem right, but have actually nothing to do with the underlying medicine.
In terms of carbon footprint, robots are going to be much less efficient than humans in terms of achieving power output from the motors. There's nothing quite like a human muscle in terms of energy efficiency. If we need these robots to be performing things with high torques and big power outputs, then that's where you could easily see companies using an awful lot of electricity in order to get those robots to perform the tasks.
I mean, robot ethics can be a big problem. Already you know these IoT devices that can listen to you and then record your voices and then monitor your patterns, behaviors, and things like that without even asking you. So right now these devices are just static stationary sensors that can just listen to you, but when they are mounted on robots, it may be that these robots can see you or walk around and listen to you. The amount of data they can gather about personal life, how the rooms look like, what did you eat and how did you cook and what did you cook, and then what kind of tools did you use and when do you cook and when you went out and what everything about you. Robots can be used as a proxy to monitor people.
If a technology can replace humans without an effective productivity gain, then it is a bad technology. And then it can only have a labor replacing effect. Do you think this kind of bad technologies and their labor replacing effect will become dominant and overshadow good technologies, meaning the ones that are creating new labor intensive tasks for humans?
So I think a big part is how diverse the economy is, because if this process is happening a little bit everywhere, the economy might just absorb it. And of course, education is very important, retraining of people, as much as you can and training people very well in the first place. And then this process might not be as bad, but if you think of the concentration of, for example, mining regions or countries that specialize in one thing, then I believe this can become a massive problem with what you call bad technologies when they fall away because it's too much and it cannot be absorbed.
Asimoglu and Restrepo have done some compelling work that suggests that, the reason that these technologies have become dominant is to do with the tax code and incentives for the development of different types of technology. So yes, I think that absent some consideration of the forces that kind of drive the development of those technologies to the detriment of others, yes, I would expect that to continue to accelerate.
Currently, there is this tendency to develop artificial intelligence in the direction of further automation, and given that this has become a trend, that creates a burden for firms to riding this wave in order to remain competitive. So there are these financial incentives that further push firms' decision towards this direction.
What has happened over the last few years with more attempt to quote unquote bring jobs back, those jobs that have been lost to other countries, say China, typically the US discussion is about China, those may have been the jobs that you're not going to be able to recreate in the US anyway. So it is quite likely that that's where you're going to perhaps unintentionally just incentivize bad technologies to be used more and more.
The reality is that, machine learning and automation as of now are more in this couple of buckets that we were talking about, software 2.0 and human in the loop. And these technologies would actually enhance human productivity. We're still far away from technologies that can actually replace human in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence, as I was saying.
It's more like a vertical versus horizontal kind of innovation idea. It's not bad because if I don't work, I have more time, and as long as I agree that extra time increases my utility, it should still be welfare improving, unless I put like an intrinsic value to me working in welfare. If a technology replaces human beings without an effective productivity gain, it's still expanding the possibility set of choices I can take as a person how to spend my time. And as long as I spend that time usefully and in the direction of increasing my utility, that it should be fine.
Probably the most interesting finding from the workshop was the fact that technology per se is not inherently good or bad for the labor market or for the society as a whole. So, and by technology, I mean both the most recent technological development wave of AI and machine learnings, and also previous waves of technological development. So we know that technology can have a labor replacing effect and so can substitute workers, but can also create new jobs, so reinstate workers.
An increasing number of robotics and software experts will be required for developing and training robots. But in the longer term, the idea is that any non-expert can train and interact with any robot. The development of robots comes with many technological, ethical, and environmental challenges. Some robots can be more dangerous than humans because humans are very good in assessing and handling unforeseen danger. The monitoring required by robots and the IoT is already creating a data privacy dilemma that needs further government regulation.
Whether this particular technological wave is fundamentally different than the ones preceding it. So the previous technological revolutions, such as computerization or industrial revolution, if we go further back, have had labor market outcomes. So they've eradicated some tasks and made some jobs redundant. But at the end, they've created other tasks on their behalf. And there's a very prevalent train of thought that thinks automation and robotization will just be more of the same.
In general, I can say that it was an impressive workshop for me in order to compare engineering and economic point of view and the difference between academic and industrial perspective. And also, this workshop has helped me to realize that I am not aware of many things in my field. and that are so many things I should consider when working in the field of robotics.